Here is a movie of my 2016 science fair project. I decided to do an experiment with sugar rocket motors. I thought it would be interesting to add different chemicals to the fuel to try to change the color of the flame, so that's what I did. I then had to write a draft hypothesis. This is what I came up with. Fuel additives such as potassium and borax will affect the color of smoke and flame emitted from the rocket motor. This sounded good, so after tweaking it a bit, I began the project. The first step was to make some fuse. I started by preheating an oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, I set a small non-stick frying pan on the stove and set the burner to medium-high heat. When doing projects like this indoors, you should always make sure to have proper ventilation. I then weighed out 36 grams of potassium nitrate and 24 grams of white table sugar, as well as 1/3 of a cup of water. I shook the potassium nitrate and the sugar together in a sealed container until they were well mixed. Afterwards, I measured and cut 12 feet of 100% cotton yarn. I checked that the frying pan had reached its full temperature and then added the water, making sure that it boiled within 30 seconds. I sprinkled the sugar and potassium nitrate mixture into the boiling water, stirring constantly until all of it had dissolved. I then let it boil undisturbed until most of the solution became frothy. I wadded the yarn into a small pile and then placed it in the pan with the solution. I stirred constantly and pushed the yarn pile around inside the pan, letting it soak up all of the liquid. Once all the fluid was gone, I turned off the burner and transferred the yarn onto a cookie sheet. I unwadded the yarn back into a string and laid it out on the sheet in a coil pattern, making sure none of the yarn was touching. Making sure the oven was preheated, I carefully placed the sheet inside and set a timer to 10 minutes. When the timer went off, I took out the sheet and checked if the fuse was done. It didn't have a dark enough brown color and was still mushy, so I baked it for another 5 minutes. This time, the texture seemed to be good enough and it had the proper brown color. While letting the fuse cool, I unstuck it from the sheet with a fork. The fuse became harder as it cooled, until it was easy to break apart. I broke it at each turn in the coil pattern, which left me with nice long segments of slow-burning fuse. The fuse worked quite well, as you will see soon. It was then time to make some rocket fuel for the motors. I found a location that was well ventilated and away from any open flame. I started by weighing out 65 grams of potassium nitrate and 35 grams of confectioner's sugar. I then ground the potassium nitrate in a coffee grinder for about 30 seconds. Please note that a chemical vapor may come out of the grinder after the lid is removed, so it is a good idea to back away until it clears. I combined the sugar and ground potassium nitrate in a sealed container and vigorously shook it for around 2 minutes. The fuel is now finished and should be stored in an airtight container. Since I then had enough fuel for 4 to 5 motors, I began making some. I threw a handful of fragrance-free kitty litter in the spice grinder I used earlier and ground it for about 30 seconds. This clay powder will be used to plug both ends of the motor. The next step was to cut and mark a 10-inch segment of 3/4 inch oak dowel. As shown in this image, make a mark 1 inch to the left of the center of the dowel, a mark 3/4 of an inch to the left of that mark, and a mark 1 3/4 inches to the left of that one. For each motor, I cut a 4-inch segment of 3/4 inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe. While holding the pipe segment firmly on a steel plate, I used a funnel to pour in a spoonful of ground litter. Continuing to hold the pipe firmly, I slid the dowel into the pipe marked side down and hit the top of the dowel several times with a rubber mallet. I added ground litter until the top of the pipe lined up with the second mark I made on the dowel. If I accidentally put too much in, I just twisted the dowel to loosen up the top layer of packed material and poured it out. I then added a spoonful of fuel and repeated the packing and measuring process. I finished off packing the motor with another litter plug. Next, I had to drill the nozzle. I clamped the motor sideways on a table. I took a 7/32-inch drill bit and marked it 2½ inches from the tip. I began drilling the bottom plug of the motor by hand while trying to keep the hole as centered and straight as possible. When I was done drilling, I tapped it against the table to knock out all the loose powder. The motor was then ready to be used. Since my experiment called for fuel additives, I had to make some more. I repeated with this motor making process 3 times, but mixed ground chemicals with the fuel before packing. I began with the ratio of 10 parts fuel to 4 parts additive. The additives I used were borax, Epsom salts, and ice melt. I ground the additives in the spice grinder before mixing them with the fuel. I theorized that the borax would make a green flame, the Epsom salts a white flame, and the ice melt a blue or purple flame. This leads me to my first test. After inserting a piece of fuse into each motor, I began the test. Here are videos of my results. Come on. You can do it. Go.
You got failed, you got...
There, whoa, that one took off. Oh yeah!
What color is that? Whoa!
Whoa.
That burned hot. I bet you that's the salt, isn't it?
Yeah. They probably all burned strangely because of excessive amounts of additive, but I still wasn't sure why there was no color. The road salt fuel burned so hot it melted the casing, most likely because of its magnesium content. I later tried replacing the top 3/8 of an inch of fuel with pure additive. The fuel then burned properly, but there was still no color. I'm not sure what else you could do to test my hypothesis, but it was definitely an educational experience. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video will help you with your own experiments.